hello and welcome to Coproduce Care. Today we have with us Jez, who is Bethanys' dad, and he has some really interesting experience around assessment and treatment units and supporting his daughter who has autism through the system and her experiences in using services. So welcome, Jez.
Morning.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think it might be useful to start off with, for people who don't know you, just to give a little bit of overview of who you are and Beth's journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm perhaps better known as Jeremy, Bethany's dad, from my Twitter account. Beth spent 3 years basically locked in a seclusion room or a couple of seclusion rooms in different settings in really horrific circumstances, and for no other reason than she is autistic. The system totally failed to meet Bethany's support needs, and they locked her away. So I've been quite a vocal campaigner to get Bethany's situation addressed, and that became actually stretching that out into trying to do something around the whole of the failures regarding supporting people with autism and learning disabilities.
And I'd like to know, if you can, just a little bit about Bethany outside of the situation she's been put through. What is her personality like? How do you know her as your daughter?
Bethany is the funniest person you will ever meet. Within minutes of meeting anyone, she will have them in tears of laughter. She is like any other 18-year-old. She loves fashion, she loves makeup, she loves having her hair done, she loves pampering. She just has this tiny part of her autism that creates massive amounts of anxiety that leads to challenging behaviour. Apart from that, when Beth is in a happy place, you would not know her from any other 18-year-old. She is an amazing, amazing character.
And I think it might be useful to sort of discuss how you had the experience of her being with you. I don't know if she lived with you for a while or in the community, to your first contact of her being in an ATU, assessment treatment unit.
I mean, Beth's life. Beth was our second child, so she's got an older brother. And when Beth was very small, you could see straight away that there were differences between how she was hitting the normal milestones of development that her older brother had. That particularly came out when we first started to take her to things like toddler groups, where she would be with other children her own age. So she would be very, how can I put it? If another child had a toy that she wanted, she would take it. There would be no hanging around waiting for her turn. She would see something and she would want it. If that meant pushing the child off a push-along bike or something like that, she would do that. I remember sitting in numerous sort of play groups, because we tried to expose Bethany more and more to social situations. Other parents were there sitting, relaxing, drinking coffee. We were like meerkats. What's she up to now?
Yeah.
She was different. And you could see that she didn't understand how, as a parent, we were empowered to make decisions over her. So telling her to go to bed, telling her to get dressed, they would cause her to become quite upset. Beth then moves into school and they see the same problems. They see Beth quite happy to engage in a situation. So if it was doing a bit of art or colouring, she'd be happy to do that. The moment they asked her to change and to sit and do circle time or reading, they would get a reaction because Beth would not want to do it. Those episodes escalated more and more. Beth would pick up chairs and throw them at teachers and things like that. And that created then the involvement of special educational needs support systems in the school. They struggled to support Beth, and Beth found herself, first of all, excluded temporarily, and then for longer and longer periods. And this was at the age of 5 and 6. That leads then to involvement with the child and adolescent mental health services and to the involvement of social care. We found that a horrendous process. We would take Bethany along to a child psychologist who would take our sort of history to date. They would spend 55 minutes out of an hour-long session finding out about family background, Beth's life story to date. They would then have 5 minutes working with Beth. You would then get a subsequent appointment for a month or 2 months or 3 months down the line. And when you went for that psychologist has moved on. You see a new psychologist who won't work with the notes of the previous one. So they spend the first 55 minutes taking the life history and the story and the backstories. Beth's not getting any intervention or therapy. And that just became a pattern. One psychologist after another, with very little actual help. What we found is, as parents, we were blamed. You know, all of the things that Bethany was doing must have been down to us. We were doing something wrong. At no point did they look at the fact that Beth had an older brother who, to this day, you know, he's you know, he does all of the things that you would expect a child to do. But it wasn't what we were doing. Bethany was different.
How were they making you feel that it was all your fault?
We were sent away and we were told to use super nanny techniques, to put boundaries in place, timetables, to enforce the things that we were telling Beth to do. We became the experts on super nanny. I could write books on it. But the way it worked with Beth, you know, one of the techniques was, you know, the naughty step. Beth would do something and go and sit herself on the naughty step. Or she would take a toy, one of her favourite toys, put it in the box that we use when we took things away from her, and then go and punch her brother. You know, these things, these strategies that we use with her older brother, they didn't work. There was no cause and effect with Beth. It was just, I want to do this, I'm going to do it, regardless of structure and boundaries. We were sent on parenting classes 3 times by the local authority. And yeah, it worked brilliantly with Beth's older brother. Didn't work with Beth. But we were just told, you're not doing it right.
So how did it go from, she was supported by social care services, and then how did she end up in, was it the assessment and treatment unit, which was one of the...
No, there was a process before then. Beth went to a special school. They put Beth in a school for children with behavioural and emotional difficulties. So Beth was in a school where she was with children that had been quite badly abused, emotionally, physically, sexually. Parents who, you know, did not engage with their children. The children had very delayed sort of upbringings. All that setting did was taught Beth how to be more aggressive, how to be very rude, horrendous language. It did so much damage to Beth.
So in fact, I was just going to say that it's, rather than being therapeutic, it actually made her situation, her life, her experiences even worse.
Oh yeah. Beth, as we now know, is a social mimic. So the setting that you put Bethany in, she will mimic the behaviours around her. So in that setting, it was so destructive. It really, really was bad. There was one positive thing that came out of that school experience, is they first suggested that Bethany had something called pathological demand avoidance, PDA. And it's part of the autistic spectrum, and it basically is a total inability to cope with demands, either demands from other people or even demands that you put on yourself.
Okay.
So this was why people were getting the reaction to, you know, it's time for bed, or, you know, it's time to stop what you're doing and have a meal, it's time to go to school. This would cause so much anxiety for Beth. This is this PDA, this demand avoidance.
Yeah.
When we read the diagnostic description of PDA, it was the light bulb moment for us.
Right.
And the strategies you use with PDA are completely opposite to what we had been using, why we were getting the reaction. So instead of boundaries and structures, you give choices. So if you were to say to Beth, okay, do you want to go to bed at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, or 9 o'clock? You want her in bed by 9, obviously. Beth will choose that because it's the later one. But she has that choice. She has the control, and it reduces the anxiety.
I think the interesting thing that you've told me so far is that I feel, you know, as a mother myself, as a person, I can relate to so much of what you said. You know, a child where you've had to use different strategies, to somebody who just wants to be given choice over their life rather than set boundaries which are very strict. So it's interesting to see how you can relate to so many of her experiences in her life, and yet the kind of systems that have supported her have been so restrictive. How did she then go from that situation onto where she was in a unit?
The local authority refused to accept the suggestion that she had PDA. It is not in any of the diagnostic manuals. It was refused. It was the worst thing that ever happened. So Beth was left in special schools. The CAMS workers actually closed Bethanys' case down with the footnote that said the outlook for this child is bleak.
Awful.
It was a horrendous document. That was the case. They just were happy that Beth was in a school setting and they felt she would manage in that. What we got instead was Beth was being put into autistic schools who used timetables and boundaries, strict controls. Beth reacted very badly to that. The schools would struggle to manage Beth using those techniques. They would basically end the placements. So you would end up with a very hastily arranged setting. And that just became a pattern of one failed placement after another, And Beth just hit this spiral of nowhere can support me. The local authority came out to see us once at home and saw how we worked with Beth. And they gave us brilliant feedback. But they still would not accept the diagnosis of PDA. So our hope to get the input from the specialist around that and a proper setting just never materialised. And it got to the point where after one particular placement failed, Beth actually came home, got very upset at home about the placement failure, ran out of the house and actually took a frustration out on somebody that was passing by. Police were called. Beth was arrested. She was 11 years old, taken to our local children's hospital, who basically didn't know what to do with this massive level of anxiety that Beth was in. And Beth was sectioned at that point at the age of 11, taken to an assessment unit in Bury, up north. And within days, Beth was being nursed in isolation on her own. They were using behavioural management techniques. So Beth would have to be well behaved for 24 hours, 48 hours in order to be moved out of a room that had nothing at all in it. That's a demand to say to Beth, you've got to be good to go onto a room where you can have your toys. You know, she's 11 years old. She wasn't even allowed a teddy bear unless she behaved. That's a massive demand. Beth can't do the demands. So Beth never ever made it more. They had 5 levels of rewards. Beth never made it past level 2. And she only got out of that hospital because another patient burnt it down.
Really?
And she was sent home. Because they didn't have another setting for her. We were lucky then because she was moved to a school in Derbyshire, and it was an autistic school, but her sort of senior care worker knew about PDA and she knew about the strategies. And that placement to date is the longest place Beth ever stayed. She was in that school for 18 months, and we would go and visit her. We'd have a home for holidays, weekends. It was working really well. She had the support within the team around her PDA. Sadly, that staff member moved on and actually took a team with her, and they put a team in place that just used autistic strategies, boundaries, timetables, demands. That placement collapsed within a matter of weeks, and we were back into the pattern of a reactive placement, couldn't support her, broke down, another reactive placement. And Beth was incredibly challenging. I don't hide that fight. I'm 6'4" and I'm built like a brick wall, and Beth takes after me. She's a very big, very strong girl. She learned, or she was taught, that if you become aggressive in a situation that you can't cope with, so for example, if your care staff have taken you out somewhere near the shops and you see something you want and you can't buy it, then that becomes upsetting for Beth and her anxieties go through the roof. She found out very quickly that if you either attack one of your carers or even have a go at a passerby, police will be called. The police will put you in a police car. They will take you away. So they've removed you from the situation causing the anxiety.
Right.
That's a really good thing. Quite often they'll sit on you, restrain you. Beth likes deep pressure. In the same way that our endorphins are released when we get a hug, Beth gets the same thing from restraint. So police holding her on the ground, not a bad thing for Beth. They put you in the police car, they take you away, they put you in a cell where they give you hot chocolate and food. Again, you've got control. Then your mum and dad turn up. So these things, Beth learns that she can remove the anxiety and return to a predictable pattern where she has control.
How did you get I was just wondering, how did you get to the point where you realized that that was the case?
We knew this because the literature around PDA,
right,
it predicts all of this sort of thing. This isn't a unique behaviour for someone with PDA.
Right, okay.
But we could not get that accepted as a diagnosis. Beth had childhood autism. That's all her diagnosis stated, and because of that, our local authority, who have no autism team or autism specialism, would just see it as a label. So any provider that says we are experts in autism, they were happy to go, yeah, result, they'll take that. At no point did anybody assess how well a placement could handle Beth's challenging behaviour. We were terrified because of all the exposures to the police, and Beth was being charged with assault, assault against police officers. At one point, Beth had 18 counts outstanding against her. So when we're told that the whole system is terrified that Beth will end up in prison, she was getting older, when it was suggested that what was needed was a stay in a specialist hospital where Beth would be assessed, where she would get therapeutic input, where her medications would be reviewed in a safe environment. You know, this is what we were promised. Obviously, as a parent, you're being told these things by people who are supposed to be experts, by social workers, by psychologists.
Yeah.
We allowed that hospital bed. We allowed Beth to go there.
So that was the ATU.
This is the ATU. This was 2016.
Okay.
Just before Christmas.
And at what point did you realise that this was not what you'd been promised? This was totally the opposite of what you'd been promised.
Within 2 weeks, Bethany was in the cell.
Oh gosh.
Bethany was not on a ward. She was not mixing with other people. She was locked away. This place full of experts, St Andrews Healthcare in Northampton, they did not have the knowledge around autism. They did not have the ability to manage Beth. The first time I knew about it, we went to visit Beth because we would have contact with Beth every week. Instead of being led to one of the family rooms, we were taken through this series of locked doors. They open a door, they lock it behind you. It's like going through a prison. Yeah. Down all these corridors. And it reminded me of the scene in Silence of the Lambs where Clarice Starling goes to visit Hannibal Lecter for the first time. You walk past this series of rooms that have got quite disturbed people in, and there at the end of it is Beth behind a big perspex window. It was horrific. Yeah. Beth was 16 years old. Beth didn't need that. No. Beth before then had been getting ready for GCSEs.
It almost feels like instead of actual prison, she was put in basically a prison. It feels like it was punitive. She was being punished for the fact that she just coped with the world, saw the world very, very differently, but because of lack of expertise around the team and empathy with what she's going through, she was punished for not really doing anything wrong, but for not being given the support that she needed.
I think I don't see it as punishment. I don't believe that they punished Beth per se in that way. It was more their inability to manage Beth's behaviour, and all they saw was risks. They stopped seeing Beth as being anything other than potentially able to hurt somebody. So they stopped looking for ways to get Beth the therapy that she requires. It's far easier, cheaper to lock someone in the room and stick a security guard outside that door. They are not an expert setting in autism. They really are not.
So in terms of, that was 2016, we're right at the start of 2020. How is Bethany doing now? Are you in a different place?
Beth is in a very different place now. It's taken an enormous amount of work to get her there. There's obviously a huge story for how that 3 years developed, how we got Beth moved. She stayed in St Andrews in the cell environment for just over 2 years. We did a lot of. I'd always been wary of using the media to highlight Beth's situation, but it got to the point where Beth, her autism, as I said earlier, she wants to do two things when she gets anxious. she will revert to the basic instincts of fight or flight. So she becomes anxious, she will want to run away, get away from that situation. If she can't run away, she will be combative. If you were in a car park, multi-storey car park late at night, and suddenly the lights go off and you hear footsteps behind you getting closer, that is Beth's baseline level of anxiety, that feeling of fear. So in that situation, most people would want to either run away, or if they needed to, they would, attempt to fight off the potential attacker. That is Beth. Denied those abilities by keeping her in a cell, she will resort to another behaviour, and that is self-harm. Okay. She will headbang. She will bite herself. Because of that, there were lots of things that Beth wasn't allowed to have. So anything that had hard plastic, those CDs, she would break and use to cut herself. St Andrews used an awful lot of agency staff, and one night an agency staff who'd been given no handover about Beth and what she can and cannot have, gave Bethany a biro. And Bethany took the biro apart, and the insert with the ink in, she inserted into her forearm, completely buried the 16th refill in her arm.
Gosh.
And it stayed there.
Yeah.
They were telling us that Beth was too dangerous to consider taking to hospital to have this removed, and that the inks are non-toxic, so it's not a threat. Gosh. Now, my view at that point was, if there was a dog in a cage with a biro stuck in its leg, there would be national outcry. And at that time, we were approached by Radio 4, who were looking and doing a piece around people who'd been in ATUs for a long time. And we did an interview, and I talked about Beth's situation, and they broadcast that. I was then told that people were talking about it on Twitter. I'd never been on Twitter. I just thought it was a bunch of keyboard warriors. But I started the Jeremy Bethanys dad account, and I talked about the horrors. I talked about how Beth was restrained all of the time, how men would go into her cell when she was anxious, because she would use clothing to tie ligatures. So men would go into the room, they would pin her to the floor and remove all the clothing. So I talked about these horrors. The local authority reacted by attempting to place a gagging order. So I was summoned to the High Court. I can't disclose what was talked about in that case because it's family court and still order. What I can say though is the local authority withdrew their application for the gagging order. The judge stated it was a very ill-conceived application by the local authority. And at that point then, the gloves were off. I could talk about Beth. Yeah. So we did a lot of media work, BBC television, we've done lots of places with Sky and local radio. And I made sure Beth was, her story was being talked about nationally. From that, I had a meeting with Matt Hancock. Barbara Keeley, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, brought up Bethanys' situation in the social care debate. And I was invited to meet with Matt Hancock. And he actually ordered 2 pieces of work to be carried out around what I was telling him. One of those was a serious case review into Bethanys' whole journey. Yeah. And the other was a review by the Care Quality Commission into the use of restraint and seclusion. Right. So that piece of work is still ongoing. The initial reports from it basically say that the system is broken. Yeah. The system does not support people with learning disabilities and autism, and they will end up being treated in the way that Beth was treated. So an awful lot of media work, a lot of campaigning. It was a real surprise to me to find out that Beth wasn't unique in any way. That there have been lots of cases like Bethanys, far worse. People whose loved ones have been in an ATU for 20 years.
Wow.
And sadly, people in ATUs who have died for no reason other than they are autistic and their needs cannot be met.
I mean, it's a form of, it feels and sounds like a form of cruelty that these ATUs and the treatment, and what you said about the biro and the justification for not treating her. It's incredible that these places and people who work there and make those justifications feel that that's okay.
The Mental Health Act itself says inpatient settings are unlikely to help people with autism and learning disabilities.
Yeah.
That act says you shouldn't be doing it, but the system does it anyway. And the reason the system does it is financial. It's about money.
Do you think, is that because there's different pots within, if someone's supported in the community, then it's the local authority who funds it, and if someone's supported in hospital, then that comes from a different pot, that's the health NHS. Do you think it just, that's the base, that's really where it comes from?
At the end of the care treatment review that sent Bethany to St Andrew's Hospital, her independent reviewing officer from the local authority sat me and Bethany's mum down and said, frankly, I just want to tell you that the local authority will be grateful of the break for paying for your daughter's care. You realise your daughter has cost in excess of £2 million?
That's ridiculous.
And then you find that, that was bad enough to hear. But then when you realise that the NHS picks up the bill, the local authority don't want Bethany back because they will have to start paying again. But also the ATU, the Assessment Treatment Unit, where is their financial assessment, reasoning to get Beth moved on? They are pocketing £13,000 a week.
It just,
so where's their motivation to move her out and get her treated?
But it seems really bizarre for me, because the whole thing that we're trying to do in the system, you would think, is to care for people. I know that you said that there's a protection of others and risk and issues like that involved, but you would think at the end of the day, you're there to care for people, but the treatment is of somebody who's not even a person, who's just someone who's a bit of funding that needs to be moved around or not moved around. It just seems so counterintuitive to what you'd expect the system to be doing with people.
Yes, and it's one of the things that the various reports and investigations into Beth, and especially the time in the ATU, it has flagged up that nobody was seeing safeguarding issues for Bethany.
Right.
It was all about risk to others, and nobody was looking at what was happening to Beth as a safeguarding issue. So why have we got somebody's human rights being abused so badly? She had no family life whatsoever. I would visit Beth in St Andrews and in subsequent units behind a locked door. I would talk to her through a hatch. That is no life for anybody, let alone a child.
I wonder, what do you think the impact of these reviews has been? Because we had Winterbourne View in I feel like it was 2011, 2010, maybe 2012, it really came out in the press and there was a report. We're now in 2020, and the initial response is, well, we have an issue, there's something reported in the press, well, we'll do a review. How many reviews do we have to have for there actually to be any action? Do you feel that there is any action from you've done so much lobbying, you've been fantastic in the press, like you said, but yet there's still these abuses happening. So
Yeah.
do you feel that the action is either coming, or you've seen things change in the years that you've been trying to get a change?
I'm just the current voice. So many people have gone before me. Like you said, the Lennon report, Stephen Bubbs reports, all of these other numerous reports. You know, we've got the Joint Select Committee that was carried out in 2019. You've got State of the Nation's Health from the CQC this year. They're all saying the same thing. The system is broken. The system does not work. What's the point of all these reviews? We know what's wrong with the system. The money is in the wrong place.
Yeah.
There's no emphasis on human rights. There's no emphasis on the equality side of things. The Mental Health Act itself isn't properly supporting people with autism and learning disabilities. We know these things. Report and review after review has just reinforced it. No one is stepping up and taking action. As part of the CQC thematic review, we have asked the CQC itself to compile the results of all the various reports going back 10 years, you know, to find out which are the key things that we keep seeing, where the holes are, and for the CQC to actually challenge government to say, we've got all these reports, why aren't you acting on it? Personally, I feel that what we need is a government minister responsible for the mental health of the nation. It's gone beyond putting a sticking plaster over what we have. We need to almost shut it down and reboot it. We need to bring together health, education and social care, all working together in one stream, all with one set of funding.
So if there was one thing that you could ask the new government to do, would that be the one thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, you've done so much, like I said, in this area. And sometimes I think the effect on the family is lost in everything that goes on with people. What toll has this taken on you?
I get asked that question a fair bit, and yeah, it's been hard.
Yeah.
It's nowhere as hard as what Bethanys had to put up with, and I get my strength from that. I get my strength from the amazing support from other campaigners and the friends that I have that have, you know, yes, I've done some campaigning, but I'm not on my own. I am part of a whole team of families doing similar work. So they're my backbone.
Yeah.
Yeah, support out there for me.
You are doing an amazing job, I've got to say. I normally, when I do these chats, I go and do a little bit of research. I go online, see if there's any other interviews that they've done. And you've got a blog. You're really active on Twitter. You be like on the news, different channels. And it seems to me so unfair that you have to have sometimes single parents, you know, or one parent or families who are lobbying against a whole system which has so much money, so many resources, and yet struggles to make the change. And I do wonder where it's something to do with culture as well as finance, but it's just something to think about, I think.
I think what we forget is there are an awful lot of people in these ATUs that don't have families.
Yeah.
That don't have someone like me talking for them, that don't have advocacy. You know, there are so many people locked away and their stories aren't being heard.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we do is we go out to social media to get questions. I have to admit, we did go out quite late in the day, but we have had a couple. I think some of them we might have addressed already, but I'll just run through them. And if you've got anything extra to add, please do. So one person asked, what was the process of getting a diagnosis as a parent? And what action do you recommend taking after receiving confirmation that a child has autism?
The process for the diagnosis came out of the additional support Bethany did at school. So
Okay.
it was quite an early diagnosis for the autism. The PDA diagnosis we finally have had attached to Beth. She is now diagnosed as autistic with traits of PDA, which is as good as you'll ever get. But that's meant her needs are now being met around that. If I could turn the clock back, I would have researched autism to the absolute nth degree, because the local authority, the social workers, the care providers, the hospitals, they don't have the expertise and knowledge required. So I think if I'd have been able to put that knowledge together myself, then maybe things could have been different. So my advice would be to make yourself the expert, but also make yourself heard and listened to in meetings, and that's the really difficult thing. And again, it's one of the things that has come out of some of the recent reviews, is the need for parents to be seen by the professionals as experts.
So it's not
really good thing. The parental voice is really important.
I think that's a really invaluable tip, because I think a lot of the time there's a power differential where you think, well, doctor knows best. So even though I'm experiencing this with my child, they're telling me something different, so I must be wrong. And like you said, initially you were being told that you were doing something wrong, when actually it was so much more complicated than that. So just giving people the confidence to question things, to speak up, I think is really helpful. The other question that we had was, what are the most important factors to consider when looking for a support service?
Can they do what it says on the tin?
Yeah.
So if they're saying they're experts in autism, if they're saying they are, competent in working with people with demand avoidance or anything like that, you want evidence of them doing it.
Mm.
How are they able to back up their claims? How many people have they moved back to their homes or to other homes? How many people they've worked with have had to go into an inpatient setting or had to go back to an inpatient setting? Is it just the management who are the autistic experts, or is it the care assistants who are delivering the daily care that are the experts? Because what we found is, lots of organisations making lots of claims that turned out it might be, the manager went on an autism course once,
Right.
but the healthcare assistants haven't got the faintest idea how to manage somebody with autism and how to support their needs.
That's a really tricky thing to do. I imagine, you have the CQC reports on registered services. So do you think they're quite a useful starting point, or do they not really give you a
The
feel of
CQC reports, yes, but these are the questions you also need to be asking of the commissioners that are commissioning those services.
Right.
What do they know about the service? Have they used the service before? What were the results from that service?
And also, because they're commissioning a service, presumably they'd be collecting the data about admissions into or incidents or safeguarding and things like that. So, I hadn't thought of that. And in terms of thinking about getting to know the service, I know sometimes when people get totally different situation, but when you're trying to get something fixed in your home, you might get quotes, or you might ask other people to give references. So would it be a good idea to ask the service for contact details of other families who've used the service, so that you can speak to them and find out more about
Absolutely. And we have experienced that just twice out of 19 different settings that Bethany has been in. Is the actual offer from the provider to say, here's families that have been through our service, here's the contact details, they're happy to discuss it with you. Now, one of those, clearly cherry-picked who those families were. So it can be a bit of a blind alley.
Yeah.
But, you know, where Bethany is now, you know, it's so clear that they have that sort of track record.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't just claim to do something; they can do it, and it is absolutely brilliant. The support package.
Great. And the other question that we had was, what sign? I mean, every person is different and will have different behaviours and likes and dislikes. But what signs should we look out for if a child or loved one is using care services like your daughter was, and they're being neglected? So, what signs of neglect should parents or families be looking out for?
You know your child, you know your loved one, and you know when presentation changes.
Mm.
You know, so if moods are dropping, if they're becoming quiet, if they don't want to talk about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, you know, then that sets bells ringing. And why won't they tell you what they're doing? If things are going well, then your loved one, your child, if they're able to, will sing the praise of what's happening to them, whereas they will hide the abuse and the neglect.
Yeah. Another question is about not being a parent or a guardian, but you obviously know a child or close to a child, and you think that they might have autism. How would you go about bringing this up to a parent or a guardian? So I suppose it might be a family member or a friend who suspects that something isn't quite right, but it's just bringing that to the attention of the parent or guardian, I suppose, without offending, maybe.
I think that's a very difficult thing to do.
Mm.
I couldn't go up to another parent and suggest their child was autistic because I'm not an expert in giving diagnosis of autism. There are so many different potential diagnoses that, you know, personality disorders, for example, demand avoidance. You know, autism itself is a whole spectrum. So, you know, I think if it's a close friend or family member, then you should be able to have a conversation along the lines of, you know, do you think we need to get support, either for the parent or for the child, if there is clearly a struggle?
Yeah.
And that's, you know,
Yeah,
you can't force somebody to do anything.
no. And I suppose it's just being mindful as well of how you have that conversation with somebody. Presumably that person might know them, and it's just thinking what is the best way of communicating it, just in case. Yeah. So the last question that we've got is, one of the questioners, they have a non-verbal child and they want to know, are there ever moments when Bethany is non-verbal and it's hard to see what she needs? How do you handle those situations? And are you ever worried she's in pain and you're not seeing it?
Oh, so there's a couple there.
Yeah.
Beth will withdraw sometimes. With Beth, she will usually do that if her needs around a particular thing aren't being met. So, for example, if she wanted to buy herself another guinea pig and you were saying no, then she can shut down a little bit. She will internalize that and think on it and dwell on it. And that will usually eventually come out in some sort of meltdown or explosion. With Beth, all you can do is offer her a range of activities that will, you know, re-engage her onto something different. I am not an expert on non-verbal children at all. With regards to, do I think Beth is in pain sometimes? I think there are an awful lot of times where Beth's autism masks a lot of other parts of Bethanys' presentation.
Right.
Beth is hypermobile, so her limbs her joints are very flexible, and she enjoys a lot of yoga. Now I know that gives her a lot of pain, and that actually can come out as challenging behaviour, and people lose sight of that sometimes. Beth will also complain about having tummy aches. Sometimes that is attention seeking. Some of it we feel that is the sort of butterfly side of the anxiety feeling that Bethany has. Sometimes it's a tummy ache. What Beth can't yet do is differentiate between those three feelings. And that leads to sometimes Beth not being supported particularly well.
And
difficult one.
yeah, it is. I think it's so unbelievably complicated. How do you get to the stage of knowing that those, yoga caused her pain, or that some things that you didn't understand before and you thought were innocent activities are actually something she's not enjoying? I suppose, how do you get to that stage? Is it by, like you said, understanding the diagnosis a bit better, and researching and then questioning some of the things that she's doing, or something that you were told when she was being supported, and that kind of like rung a bell and you thought, well, actually maybe this isn't something that we need to be doing with her?
This is where the importance of the parental voice needs to be seen, because Beth moved from placement to placement to placement so quickly. Sometimes there'd be 3 days in a placement, 4 weeks in a placement, 4 months in a placement. They didn't build up a pattern of the relationship between Beth being in pain with tummy aches, limb aches, to her behaviours. So they never saw the patterns that we as parents would see. And we weren't listened to. We weren't listened to, so support wasn't in place. These are things that the new setting Beth is in. They want to hear about these, about our thoughts, about our concerns, and they are tracking everything that happens to Beth, around Beth, in a whole series of different spreadsheets and measurements. It's extraordinary to see a completely different approach.
Totally different approach. And so is Beth in a better place now than she's been? You seem
completely different.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Brilliant.
We got to a situation where Beth had been moved at the age of 18. She had to move from adolescent services. And we thought, with all the media that happened around Beth, we thought because of the reports that come out around Beth, that she would go somewhere appropriate. She was moved to the first available bed, which was a unit for people with personality disorders. They weren't autism specific at all. Beth was locked away almost instantly when she arrived there, in the worst setting that Beth had ever been in, the hospital in Wales. We couldn't touch Beth, we couldn't hold Beth, we couldn't hug Beth. If I phoned up, they would put a phone at the bottom of the door. Beth would have to lie on the floor and talk to me.
It's so inhumane.
It was horrific. They felt that they just could not meet Beth's level of aggression, that she was a real threat to people's lives. And a care treatment review was called, because they wanted to put Beth into Rampton, the female high secure unit. The most secure lockdown facility that we have for women in this country.
Wow.
That review, we managed to get Anne Memmott, who herself is autistic, as part of the care treatment review panel. We had the panel themselves were very focused on human rights and equality.
Great.
And they completed a care review that basically said that every element of Beth's care in that hospital was wrong. And we got support from Mersey Trust. They were sending staff down who were trained in restraint reduction on actually getting people out of the long-term seclusion. Within an hour of meeting Beth, they took her outside into a secure garden, playing with her in the garden. That's how different their approach was. And they showed the staff at the hospital, ways of working with Beth to get her out of the room. After the care treatment review, they came forward to say, look, we will have Beth in our placement. We will provide a flat for Beth on her own, where she will have a team of staff who are all trained in autism. But what we want you to do is we want you to come up and deliver training on PDA to the staff. And they brought in experts from the Elizabeth Newson Centre to also deliver training on PDA. The responsible clinician is very, very, very knowledgeable about PDA. So all of the support around the demand avoidance side of Beth it is there in this unit.
Great.
And it is unbelievable.
It sounds more like what you'd expect something like that to be. The idea of a restraint reduction is exactly what needs to happen, because if you have a situation where someone doesn't know how to support someone so that they basically almost incarcerate them, that then has a negative effect on their behavior, and you're in this cyclical battle really where nothing is getting improved. But then their approach of actually, if we start with trying to reduce restraint and then look at the therapeutic environment, going out in a garden, that's fantastic. And so different.
Otherwise, all you're showing is that someone who's displaying aggressive characteristics is, you will meet them with your own aggressive characteristics and to the floor. That will resolve nothing. The current US-Iran conflict will not win by aggression. At some point, they will need to back down and negotiate. And that is the approach that it is different with Beth. The moment you negotiate and give a control and give a choices, that's what works. That's the approach they're using with Beth.
I've learned so much, and I feel like I'm going to put links of some of the things that you've been talking about in the description box of this video. What I normally do at the end of these interviews is I have Cactus Questions, I call them, which is a bit prickly questions about health and social care. And so I've been asking people and academics and whoever else we've been interviewing for these, but I'm going to flip it on its head for you and ask, what questions would you like to ask anybody, whether it's the system or the professionals or the government, to what questions do you think they need to be answering right now?
Cool, there's a range. Care in the community is massively cheaper.
Okay.
Why are we paying ridiculous amounts of money to keep people locked away in institutions that are never going to heal anybody? Why are you not listening to the reviews that you yourselves are, ordering? How many more people will have to die before something is done?
Yeah, so powerful. And I will take that to whichever politician will allow us to interview them. So thank you for that. And one of the really powerful things that you've said as well is the idea that services really need to listen to families who are basically experts in experience, especially in your situation where you've been such a positive part of her life. And they talk about care plans and getting them right, but you are basically a walking, talking care plan of Bethany. So including families in someone's journey is so important. So you have recently decided to dedicate all of your time to the cause of improving services or advocacy. What's next for you?
Whew. At the moment, I'm getting lots of requests to work with universities who are training learning disability nurses, to go and deliver sessions to upcoming nurses. I'm getting the same thing around social care courses as well. So some work around that.
Brilliant.
And to keep visiting Beth and just see her in the happy place where she is at the moment, because it's amazing seeing the transformation. And it's not been done by giving a medication. It's been done by having the right people in the right place doing the right thing.
And treating her like a human person. Yeah, wonderful. So I'm sure people who might not know about you want to hear more about your story and what you're doing. Where can they keep up with everything? You have a blog.
There is a blog on medium.com,
Okay.
and the same as the Twitter account, it's Jeremy Bethanys Dad.
Great. We'll put all of that information anyway on the description box of this video. So thank you so much. This has been an amazing, very emotional, I think, for me. I've learned so much as well, this podcast and video. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Jez.
Pleasure. Thank you.